a few like announcement-y kinds of things that I want to say to start with. First of all, my friend Adair McPherson is here. And I just want to let you know that on the 23rd of February, that's not this Saturday, that's not today, that's not next Saturday, this is Saturday after that, she will be here presenting her brand new, very quirky, strange, beautiful book called Roadkill ABCs. And she'll be signing copies for people who want to pay a very special price. And if you want to know more about her, there's a little sign outside.
Is that a cookbook?
It's you might be inspired. I don't know. Some of the pictures look very delicious. Okay. So anyway, it's a really cool book, and I'm really pleased and proud to let you guys know that she will be here presenting it on the 23rd from 2 to 5 o'clock. Oh, good, I have my glasses. So the other thing I wanted to say, this is Kenna Doringer. Am I going to, no, but do I say it right?
It's close enough.
No, you, what?
It's Daringer.
Oh.
You're daring and Daringer.
Thank you. Oh, thank you. Okay, so this is our very daring Kenna Daringer, and she's got the very beautiful work in the room that you probably came through for starters, and that's her husband Ted, who's agreed to and because there's some people sort of behind him, I'll try to move around a little bit. So. What? We're giving the talk now? You know, it takes a long time to lead up to a thing like this, and then you're actually in the moment, and then that's kind of weird. Okay, so here we go. Hi, my name is Roma, and I'm a hoarder. Some of you look at that. The others can figure it out. Okay. So, I think I actually not only know probably everybody in here, but I'm probably dear friends with everybody in here. But let's just pretend for a moment that there are a few people that I don't know. So I'll put that hoarding thing in a bigger context, and I'll say I grew up on the East Coast in New Jersey. I had a very sort of traditional art education. Well, I got a BFA at Carnegie Mellon and an MFA at Pratt. I did a bunch of years of teaching. I also had an unconventional art year at a university in India, University of Baroda. And I taught for a while. I've been making artwork all along. And so that, now we're here. So that's quick, I hope. Also, speaking of efficient and quick, I may I'm going to try to hold pretty tightly to this because I'm like a tangent go off on So I'm going to try real hard to not to do that, and so I might sometimes kind of read things. Okay, so in trying to think about what to share with you today, I tried to pay attention to the kinds of questions that people ask me as they come through the exhibit, because it's been open for a week. And most people have been asking me questions that have had to do, sometimes people really focus on process, maybe especially when I do cut paper things. But in terms of this show, people have been asking mostly in terms well, how do you develop your ideas? How did you come up with this particular theme? And why are you making artwork about sort of related to hoarding or to objects that are, why this? So I'm going to try to see if I can address that a bit today. So for me, some people are, and I'm included in this, people who are sometimes have their art ideas come out of manipulation of materials, working with something, and then you get an idea. But I would say more often for me, it's ideas that are the driver when I'm making things. Often the ideas that drive my artwork have to do with spiritual things. They often have to do with beliefs. They have to do with doubts. They have to do with longings. And for instance, before I met my lovely husband, Prem, who I can't believe put on a jacket. About 30 years ago, and before I met Prem, I was making a lot of artwork that revolved around the theme of hoping to find a life partner. Maybe that's some the magic of making artwork, right? Is that Yeah, like the cave paintings, right? They wanted to do, oh, here, okay, it's a tangent. We'll try not to have too many. I was thinking about like cave paintings, and they made like pictures of things that they were hoping to get in a hunt. So it was like making pictures of rain, and then there he is. Isn't that never existed? And we could call that the life-changing magic of making things up. Yes, come in. But you have to stand. So, where's my place? When you go off on a tangent, you're, okay, so that's where I was, making a lot of artwork about that. Now I'm like 60, right? Actually 62. And I've had a lot of time by now to accumulate. And I've accumulated some pounds. Okay, I've accumulated a lot of friends. Thank you for coming. I really appreciate that. And I've accumulated a lot of experiences, and I've accumulated a lot of things. So it's not really a big surprise, maybe, that at this time I'm thinking about, my artwork is sort of coming around to being about making decisions about what I'm going to hold on to and what I'm going to let go of. So I'm referring, when I say that, both to the literal process of like sorting through and deciding about physical material objects, because I have a lot of those. But I'll talk a little bit more about that later. But I'm also exploring this hold on or let go topic from other lenses too. So I'm going to start by talking about some of the other paintings besides the interactive things. And so give you some idea about how the ideas develop. So maybe it's a little bit hard to... anyway, there's a painting back there that if you can't turn around, you can turn around. Otherwise, you just imagine that there's a woman in it who is looking real sad. And she's holding on to a hand that is maybe not really attached to a body, and it sort of fades off into... It's not a severed limb, but the body has sort of disappeared. And behind her are big piles of clutter. She is from a painting that I saw 20 years ago in the Academy in Florence. It's from a painting called Man of Sorrows. And it's got Mary on one side, Mary Magdalene on the other side of Jesus that's coming down off the cross. And I think with her like kind of long blonde hair, she could kind of be a little stand-in for me there. And I was thinking in that piece about the way our attachment to physical things can sometimes be a way of trying to fill a void that is actually created by other kinds of loss. So maybe some kind of loss maybe in a spiritual sense, or in a case of losing a loved one. So, oops, sorry, here comes another tangent. When last Saturday was Museum Day, and there was parents with 2 kids in here, and it was a really fabulous experience watching those kids watching the parents help the kids understand that painting, and they were kind of saying, "Oh, you know, Mom, Dad, what does sorrow mean? And like, what do you think's happening in that painting?" And man, it was really like wonderful. Like I felt like, oh, that's such a great experience for those kids getting permission to wonder about pieces, ask questions about pieces, and the last thing say, well, we just have to kind of guess because the artist isn't here, and then I get to here I am. Yeah, they want to know, is that person, is that arm part of somebody who's died? And then I could say, yeah. So speaking of that kind of loss, the loss of mourning, so as you move around later, if you haven't had a chance yet, behind Ina there is another piece, an after-image piece. This also sort of dealing with the kind of letting go that we don't necessarily want to do, which is, again, the loss of a loved one. In this case, there's a picture of my mom. And if you haven't, gotten to play with it yet, if you pick it up and stare at it, you get a kind of a brief, ghostly image in that frame. And it's kind of, it's frustrating, actually. Even if you can see it, it just doesn't last as long as you want it to. So as artists, we get to manipulate materials and create, you know, metaphors and situations where hopefully something that we're thinking about and feeling we can kind of share in some way with another person. So another kind of attachment, this piece is called epigenetic defenses. There is a thing called epigenetic inheritance. This is like are there any like, you know, biology people out there? Don't, oh yeah, sorry, oh, I better get this right. So epigenetic inheritance is a kind of passing down of, if a being has been through some kind of trauma, let's say, for instance, a mouse, okay? Research does seem to indicate that the trauma experience of the parent mouse can get passed on to the next generation, not through like changes in the DNA exactly, but due to changes in the maybe supporting structures or something that allow for the expression of certain kinds of things. Maybe this is how it works, but in any case, there seems to be a suggestion that if you know, this mouse has been traumatized in relation to water, that even if you take the babies away right away and they don't get to learn it through the behavior of the mom, that the baby mice might also be afraid of water. I don't know. Is it BS? Or is it real? Okay, I got it right. Okay, so I was thinking about that, but that actual thing, but I was also thinking of it kind of metaphorically. I know my mom, probably your mom too, went through some, and actually probably talking about the same mom in many cases. But like, you know, if parents that we, you know, people that are important to us went through trauma, that does often create in us sometimes automatic responses to things that we may not even realize that we're responding in ways that are not related to our own experience, but are related to somebody else's trauma. Or I was thinking in my own life, you know, in previous versions of when I was little, let's say, I might have developed some useful responses to certain kinds of stressful situations. Responses that were useful at the time, but you know, in a time of war, okay? Mm-hmm. But now I'm living in a time of peace, and I still have that knee-jerk response. It's still attached to me, and I still keep responding to people or situations in that defensive way, even though it's like not necessary, you know? But if I'm not aware that might be why I'm doing those things, then I can't begin to consider whether or not it's a thing I might be able to let go of. So that's what I was thinking about in that piece. It's like, you know, can we sometimes, it might be good for me to examine my behaviors to see if they actually have to do with my life here and now, or if they're just something clinging to me from the past. Okay, look, I've looked at these papers for a minute. I might not even be on this page. Oh, okay. All right, so, yay, hi Dexy. Hi. So sometimes people say, you know, oh, if I interpret this piece, is it okay if my interpretation is not like yours, or is there one interpretation for a piece? So I wanted to share it with those of you who don't go through the art making process that often with yourselves maybe, that at least for me, there's often a whole territory, a whole kind of realm of things I'm thinking about when I'm making a piece, and I often don't know at the beginning of it exactly what it's about until the end, and I go through a lot of explorations. So, for example, let's take that piece with the hands. That piece is called, there's lots of hands there, right? But the one in the tall one. With the red arms. It's called Perfect as They Are. So for me, this piece has like a lot of different, a kind of a broad territory of things that I'm thinking about. And it is kind of looks to me, kind of like somebody's dealing with a baby. Like maybe this being is coming into the world. And we've got, one of the first things that people do say that what I was thinking about, the kind of holding and letting go of, I was thinking about there is like, as a parent or as a person that nurtures others in any kind of way. You know, how tightly do we hold on? How loosely do we keep that one that we care for in our grip? In order to let them, what is the best grasp in order to let them become what they're actually meant to become, what they're going to be. So, you know, that baby looks very beautiful to me. There's nothing upsetting about it, but it is an odd baby. And it's not the baby that you expect. So, you know, like one of the first things that the baby pops out, oh, yay, 10 fingers, 10 toes, right? Mm-hmm. But actually, this baby has 20 fingers and 20 toes. You know, so one thing it could be is maybe if we don't hold on too tightly, that creature, that being, that baby can become more even than we expect, right? They may have, if we think of our fingers, our hands, and our feet as the ways that we interact in the world and the potential to become things, that, you know, maybe there are superpowers in the people if we don't force them to stay in our expectation. And then I also have 2 daughters, so it could just be 20 fingers and 20 toes, because between the 2 of them, that's how many I counted. But there's also a kind of a gender politics aspect to this piece, because okay, let me see. You know, I took this online exam or something a few years ago. It's an exam which is supposed to reveal to you, you know, whatever your implicit biases might be. And the results indicated that I have at least a slight preference for LGBT people. So, that was not a big surprise to me, and I'm glad that I don't have to work to let go of prejudice against those groups of people. And my daughters have introduced, through my daughters, a lot more LGBT people have come into my life, and especially I'm thinking at the moment about transgender and non-binary people. And I'm happy about having those people in my life. I don't have to work to get over my prejudices against them. That's great. But what I find is that I do have to work to get over my sort of very deep-rooted vocabulary, you know, gendered vocabulary. It's really hard for me to make the shift to say they. So in the title of that piece, which is Perfect as They Are, yeah, I was thinking of my 2 daughters, okay? But I'm also thinking of it as a kind of a nod to and an acknowledgement of the theys that are in my life. You know, maybe you'll think of something else when you look at it, and that's fine too. Perpetrated on others by a being that doesn't care about anybody else. You know, it's nice to sort of shift it to like, okay, well, you can't help it. But, you know, the truth is, I had a lot of years of, you know, weeping and gnashing of teeth. And it turns out that none of that unhappiness, none of that like suffering actually ended up in my getting rid of any amount of blood. Speaking of holding on and letting go, right? So if I can't let go of the things, you know, at least I can work on letting go of like the suffering. Yeah. Because they were not actually connected in a useful way. Speaking of, you know, our responses, the things that we think we have to keep holding on to. So it was not a useful response to feel horrible about myself every morning, looking at that pile next to my bed. You know, it's not. So even though I haven't gotten rid of those piles, they haven't gotten. I don't think they've gotten that much worse either. Okay, so I think they just move around. You know, I can do some things this morning, and I'm not bringing that thing. But what I have done, okay, what I have done is I have put the effort into figuring out how to let go of those bad feelings, and go ahead and lead a happy, mentally healthy life anyway. So, I'm not going to be able to give you good advice about how to declutter, although I think I did bring some books, okay? I really didn't want that. But I am going to say that it is possible to be happy without that. And so now I'm going to take a very brief public service moment and just say, this is kind of a funny problem, but it is a really anguish-filled problem for some people. And for the rest of you, even if you can't boast, having a genuine hoarding disorder like I can, I know this is a tough thing for lots of people to deal with and go through. And back there in the blue is my friend Claudia, who's shaking her head up and down. So I want to say there is hope for somebody who's really ready to work on the clutter, and she probably would really mind. Anyway, see Claudia in the blue jacket? Claudia is a professional declutterer. That's my public service announcement. If you're ready to deal with your clutter, see Claudia. If she can't help you, she'll give you some advice about where you to go. Okay, so, all right. A little sip of water. Because, we live in a we live in a first world. This is a first world kind of problem. Okay, but I want to get back to talking about why issues of hoarding are appropriate in an art context. So I'm going to say, let's consider for a moment the idea that if there were no sentient beings on the planet, all these material objects would just be. They wouldn't have greater or lesser value than each other. Because it is through our assessment of how objects align with our desires and ideas about how things should go, what we think are our needs, what we want, right? It's as objects align with that we start to assess their value, right? So if we decide they're beautiful or meaningful or useful or rare, then they become kind of valuable, and if not, then they kind of don't. So that suggests, are you still with me? Yeah, kind of get that. So if one takes that position, then one thinks that things have meaning because we regard them from a perspective, and that underscores that humans are not just good, but we are the meaning value assigners. That's what we do. So the thing is, if you go through that assigning process and think deeply about everything, then life is really inefficient and you can't get out of your home in the morning. So we have wonderful, efficient, useful strategies for not thinking deeply about the meaning and value of every object that we encounter, because how otherwise could we move about and function, right? So we generally have accepted ideas that we share with a lot of other people, wisdom of the crowd, and we're okay with that most of the time. Very good idea, okay? But the thing is, some people can't turn that thing off, that evaluating. So, for instance, when I say, okay, let me work on this pile over here, everything I pick up, let me just say it's really slow going, okay? Everything I pick up, I get flooded totally, if you're like me, flooded with a whole host of emotions, memories, meanings, feelings. I pick up that thing and I'm thinking things like, maybe this belonged to someone I love or somebody I loved, and then I think about that for a while, maybe I could give this as a gift. Who would be the appropriate recipient for this? That goes on, you know. Maybe this represents some potential, you know. It could be made into something. Maybe if I can't make it into something, maybe if I keep it for a little while, I realize who could make it into something. Maybe it represents, but maybe it's something I'll need in the future. Maybe it's something that represents a future me, like the person who can learn languages, or maybe the person who has time to fix things that I know how to fix. If I can just find the plug and the lamp at the same time, and that kind of at the same time. So it is kind of funny. But when I read, there was this moment where I read a list like that in a book that was about hoarders, and I realized, you mean not everybody is thinking all of those things every time they pick up an object? Okay. So because, you know, whatever's your norm, you kind of assume that that's what everybody's doing, right? So this way of thinking really presents huge obstacles for somebody that's trying to get rid of stuff, as you can imagine, right? And it's exhausting also, and just totally zaps your will to continue with it. But guess what? Guess what? This is exactly the kind of thinking that is exhilarating and thrilling when you're making stuff. You know, when you are an artist that's going to engage, it's energizing. It's, if you don't know, all I can tell you is, like, one of my favorite things in the universe, you know, is to have that experience with an object. So, it's also like one of my worst experiences, right? Depends on if I'm trying to decide or not. If I'm not worried about letting the thing go, well, then it's just ecstasy, okay? So, it's like it's speaking to me, you know? Actually, speaking to me is not a bad way to say it, because I think people like me anthropomorphize. So we actually feel like that object, you know, if I got rid of that object, it would feel bad. You know, oh, that object, like, if you, like, this is just a tiny little sample over here. You start to read some of these stories, you'll see, like, I keep pictures of people I don't know. Because I think somebody's got it, I've been thinking about them years after I've had that picture in my refrigerator for 15 years. And if I throw it in the garbage, you know, I won't. It's good that I'm holding them up in a way and caring about them as they move through their lives that I will never meet, right? Okay. But anyway, this thing is very exciting. It is kind of it is part of the creative process for not everybody, because some people are working with limited materials and creating a representation of something lovely, but for many of us, especially people who are interested in making objects that hold meaning, this kind of thinking is important. And what you're doing in those cases as an artist, your job is to push things from a kind of neutral limbo state through this creative, you know, art-making process into a realm of things that we acknowledge or see have value and meaning. So, like, you know, you put in a ball of string and out comes beautiful lace, or you put in, you know, paint and canvas and out comes the Mona Lisa, right? And sometimes this process is really tedious and slow, or methodical. It's all different kinds of process, but sometimes this process is instant. So that's why I'm kind of leading up to giving you a chance to, like, be instant about it too. Sometimes this process is instant. Like, for instance, probably most of you know who Marcel Duchamp is. Anyway, he was an artist who did strange things. He created things like ready-mades, where he took, for instance, he took a urinal and turned it kind of on its side and titled it Fountain. And in so doing, he made it art. Okay? He moved it from an object that had limited meaning, value, etc., into one that actually had great meaning and value because it was asking some big questions about what art is, okay? If that kind of an idea bugs you, or you feel like somebody's like pulling the wool over your eye or doing something naughty in that, think about the bread that goes into the ostensorium and comes out the body of Christ just because it was there momentarily and we agreed. Okay? So this transformation from something that maybe has limited value to something that has immense value is something that, even if we think that Duchamp is kooky, it is something that most people, many, many people, agree to participate in, on a somewhat regular basis. That things can transform and become meaningful and valuable. So, I'm getting close to the end here because it's hot. All right. So, this is the hoarder's dilemma. In this piece, which is hopefully fun for people to interact with, I've depicted on these little plaques a bunch of things that are kind of just off the top of the piles, actually, in my house. And I have included underneath like a brief list of some of the kinds of thoughts that might go through my head when I pick up that object. And the reason I'm doing that is because when you see, it's possible that when some people see that object, they may be more objective than I am. And I want you to have that shared experience of having it transform, or the possibility of that. After you read that thing, then you can decide either to reject what I've said, disregard what I've said, or be persuaded by it, and then allow yourself to put it in the box that you think is appropriate. Should that thing go in the keep box, the tallest box, the giveaway box, the sell box, okay? But I'm also going to say that I've already put all of those things in a box called Axis Gallery. So whichever box you put it in, I've already called it art. So when I invite you to participate in this, I'm actually asking you to join me as in an art making experience, an experience of thinking about how a thing shifts from being of indeterminate value to something that possibly has a lot of meaning and value. And I'm hoping that will be a fun experience for you, or maybe a deep or profound experience for you, or maybe just or maybe it will be nothing, but that's fine. I guess the last thing that I wanted to say is that a lot of people, artists, I do sometimes hear artists say, I don't think about the viewer when I make my artwork. I think what they usually mean when they say that is that they've had to work really hard to get an unfriendly critic out of their head, And I've done a lot of that work too. So the nice thing about getting that unfriendly critic out of my head is that I think about you all the time when I'm making my artwork. I do not think about you. I'm not trying to make artwork that is going to please you. I'm not trying to make artwork that I think you'll buy. I'm not, that's another story. I'm not trying to make artwork. Oh, by the way, sorry, I'll take it. I'm just saying, some of these objects, if you buy the plaque, the object is on the plaque is available. Not all, but some. Okay, so, but I'm not trying to make things that, this is not my goal. I'm not thinking about you in that way. I'm not trying to make things that I think are what you're going to like or want. What I am doing is thinking about how the pleasure that it's selfish, the pleasure I'll have in turning the thing over to you and letting it become yours and so that you will have your own experience with it. So especially, this is true about paintings. It's especially true about the interactive work, which I'm so grateful to have Axis Gallery and occasionally other spaces where I can do something like this, because if you have ideas and like to make something that other people can be invited to interact with, you need a place to do it, And I can't invite you to my house because to do it there, because you can't get in. You'd have to So I'm very grateful to have this opportunity. But for me, the most fun, the greatest pleasure is in watching watching you interact with the thing, or knowing that the thing is shifting from being about me to, in a way, being your experience and being about you. So I'm going to stop now. unless there's any questions. And I'm going to say that I hope very much that you will interact with these things and have fun with them. And any questions?
Please talk about the painting behind you.
Oh, okay, I can make that very, very brief. So this painting is worried about letting go of things. It's a very reassuring idea. So in a way, kind of, as I'm coming about, I'm not, except suggesting that objects can hold a lot of meaning. I'm not lobbying here for people to keep things or let go of things, or that there's any one particular, like, this is the philosophy I now want to hand you, okay? Aside from that one that I was already heavy-handed about. So, but like, while those pieces are kind of exploring, you know, loss, things that we have to let go of and the difficulties of those experiences, this is kind of maybe a comfort piece a little bit. So I'm thinking about, also my mom told me, you know, there's a group called the Theosophists, and they have this concept called Akashic Records, which is a place where every action, every word spoken, every leaf that dropped, everything that happens in the universe is recorded in this place. And that's a comforting thought for a person that doesn't like to think that things will be lost forever. That now, whether you can find them, that's always another story. But many of you are on here, so you can like look around and find your names. I probably won't be able to find them anymore, but yeah. So that's what Akashic Records is about. So for those who can hang around a little while, there'll be some goodies to eat. Yeah. Okay, thank you. Hey, this is one of the objects.
I have one of those.